Hi everybody, I am Amanda LaFew. I'm a mom of two daughters who are affected by FPIES, and as a result I do a lot of cooking. So today I'm going to share with you our recipe for homemade strawberry jam. The only downside to this recipe is it disappears very quickly and it can be a little time consuming, but it's very well enjoyed by everybody in our household, so I hope you enjoy it as well. Thanks so much and enjoy following along. Now that you have all the basic information about ingredients and how to get this recipe started, we're going to come in about halfway through the process and you can follow me through what the cooking looks like and some explanations of some basic terms in the recipe. Thanks and enjoy! A rolling boil is when I can continue to stir, but it doesn't stop the bubbling from happening, even though I'm stirring the jam mixture. You want to continue this for about 3 to 5 minutes before you reduce the heat and begin to let the jam simmer. Right now, my thermometer if you can see that as I fog up the camera. My thermometer is right about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just using a basic candy thermometer. So now I reduce the heat and I'm just going to let this simmer. Again, it's going to simmer for like 20 to 30 minutes. In a minute I'll show you a really quick and easy way to know if your jam is getting close to being done. So as you can see, our jam is still simmering. See that there's this pink foam that's developing. Now, you don't have to skim it off, but the reason why most jam making books recommend that you skim off the foam is because it gives your jam a better color. And I really don't think it improves texture or anything, but it does give the jam a clearer color when you make it. So in order to skim it off, all you do, just dip in your spoon, scoop it up, and put it in a cup. And don't throw it away because it is super delicious. And you can save it and put it on pancakes, or if you have no self-control like me, just eat it out of the bowl once it's cool, because it's pretty tasty. So as it's simmering, you can continue to skim the foam off. So if you're going to be making jam, I would recommend getting some kind of candy thermometer. Of course, if you do this a lot, you'll get pretty good at knowing what the jam looks like when it's ready or when it's gelling. But in the meantime, a candy thermometer like this is super useful because some of them actually will mark on the thermometer where the temperature should be for different things, including jam. If you see that little red arrow, you can see our temperature is not quite there yet. There's an arrow below it that's blue for sterilize, If you've ever made jam before or done any canning, then you know that you need to sterilize your jars in advance. So if you're going to do the sterilization in a pot of hot water, and that's the temperature you are aiming for. And if you are making candy, there's some other arrows up higher that tell you what level it needs to be at. Just as an example, I make maple candy for my kids, and maple candy, you heat the maple syrup to about the softball arrow, just a little bit below that. So anyways, a great candy thermometer can be your best friend in your jam and candy making endeavors. I use it for yogurt too, so it's like $7 well spent. And we are continuing to simmer. You can see I skimmed some of the foam. This is what it looks like in the cup. It's just foam, but it is tasty, so nice jam making treat. And in a minute we will check back, and I'm going to show you how to check and see if your jam is gelling appropriately. But before I do that, I just want to give you a quick overview of what we're using. I'm doing half a batch, so I'm hoping to get about maybe 6 pint jars, maybe more, of jam. I'm using 4 cups of crushed strawberries. They were fresh, and I just cut them up pretty tiny, like diced, and I crushed them. So there's 4 cups of those, and there's 3 cups of just regular white sugar. You could use maple syrup, or you could use honey for this. You might want to play around with it. I personally have never tried it before, but I've heard of other people doing it, and it's gone well. So that's something to look into too if you aren't crazy about using just plain white cane sugar. Okay, I'll check back in a minute, and I'll show you how to check for gelling. And you can use this trick whether or not you have a thermometer. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure your jars are clean. And if you're not going to be doing freezer jam, you want to make sure your jars are sterile, which means washing them and either sterilizing them in your big canning pot at a specific temperature, or some people have used their dishwashers before, so that's another idea that you could look into. These are your lids, or your rings rather. You can reuse these and wash them as long as they don't get really rusty or bent up. And of course your jars you can reuse. The only thing you want to get new of each time are these lids. And some other tools you might like. I really like this. This is a collapsible funnel, so it stores easily, because if you're like me, you have a lot of kitchen gadgets and not a lot of space, so that's super handy. And the reason a funnel is great when you're making jam see how that fits in there so nicely, is that way the ring of your jar doesn't get jam on it. And why would you care about that? Well, the reason you care about it is you want to get a good seal when you're doing any canning, and that means the rim of your jar needs to be free of any moisture or any food or anything like that. So even though you want to fill your jars up as much as you're able, you don't want them to be overflowing or to have any food leak out along the rim, because then you're not going to get a good seal. And especially if you're doing just regular canning and you're planning to keep things on a shelf, they will potentially get bad. So the other thing that you might want that I really like is I have this lovely ladle, which is stained from lots of use apparently for jam making, but it can be really helpful in getting your jam into the jars because it's going to be hot when we put it in our jars, and we want something with a nice long handle so we don't burn ourselves. So it's a little bit about your tools. I promised that I would talk to you a little bit about how you know if your jam is gelling. Well, this is a really easy trick. You take your spoon, and I was scooping foam, but it's okay. I can still use it. And you scoop up some jam. Looks so beautiful and delicious. And then you put it on a plate. And as you can see, it's all runny right now. That's partially because it's hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put this in the refrigerator for a few minutes and see what happens. And if it gels up, that's a good sign that my jam is just about. Remember our plate that we put in the fridge, right? It was about 5 minutes ago, and this was super liquidy. Now, watch what happens. See how like slow it's going? So our jam is really starting to gel up nicely. If you look at our thermometer, about, you can't see because it keeps fogging up. We're about 10 degrees away from being at jam level. Now, I've made jam before that's set up perfectly fine and has not gotten to that temperature. But I do like to get as close as possible because if your jam doesn't set up, then you have, you know, essentially really tasty strawberry syrup, but no jam. So if you're hoping for jam, it doesn't really work. Now, it's a little tricky when you do jam this way because we are not using pectin. A lot of people use a substance called pectin when they make jam because it helps with the gelling process. My kids can't have pectin. A lot of times it's made from apples, but not necessarily so, but it is often. So since apples are bad news around our house, we just do not mess around with pectin. You can actually make your own homemade pectin. Crazy, I know, but you can do it. It's one of the few things I haven't done yet, but I have a cousin who's awesome at jam making, and she has actually made her own pectin from pineapple, and I believe from lemon, and also I believe from apples. So it can be done. And you may be wondering, where on earth would I find a recipe for making my own pectin? Well, if you look at some old cookbooks, especially you know, from the early part of the 20th century to the mid part of the 20th century, you can find some really great recipes, and you can likely find a pectin recipe from that era. So that's something to look into if you are wanting pectin. But for most fruits, just doing that fruit and sugar and getting things to a boiling point, and then letting them gel, that should be enough. It's not going to be, you know, like the stereotypical grape jelly you get at the grocery store, but it's going to be a nice jam texture. So if you can't use pectin, or you really don't want to make your own, that's okay. You can still get a nice setup. And some fruits, of course, are higher in natural pectin than others. Strawberries, apples, things like that. So those are a little bit more successful for jam making. So hopefully our jam will be ready to pour into jars very soon. So if you're making jam for the first time, or maybe you don't feel super confident in your own jam making abilities yet, it's always great to do this with a friend, especially if it's somebody who's really familiar with the process and knows what to do the first time. I made jam was with my mom, who is great at all things jam making. And, you know, she's made jam for my kids out of strawberries, out of apricots, blackberries. She even made like a wild blackberry jam. She juiced all the blackberries and strained the seeds out with cheesecloth. My mom is quite the grandma. And all those jams were pectin free, and they set up really well. So I feel like that's really encouraging for those of you who are trying to keep the ingredients as simple as possible. You know, it can be done. So, and jam's a great treat, especially if you're having a hard time getting kids to eat. You know, all of our kids go through picky phases, and I do find when I make a batch of jam, my kids tend to eat a lot better. But I guess if you put fruit and sugar on everything, I suppose that does make a difference. So, anyways, in just a few minutes, we'll be putting the jam in jars and talking about how you know if your jars get a good seal on them or not, which is important. Because again, if you don't get a good seal on your jars, all that hard work will be for nothing because your food will go bad. Alright, so my jam has been ladled into the jars. As you can see, I got most of the foam off, so I've got a nice clear texture. When I fill the jars, except for this little guy who's my leftovers, you want to get within a 1/4 inch thereabouts of the rim of the jar. You don't want to leave a lot of airspace because sometimes that can interfere with them sealing. So what do we mean by the jar sealing? Well, I can't pop the top. Like, look, over here, I can push the lid in and out, make that popping noise. But over here, it's already pushed in. And when your jars are cooling on the counter, a lot of times you'll actually hear them pop. So that's always a good sound to hear, is listening to your jars pop and knowing that they are sealed. So these jars are 8-ounce jars, and you can see I got 3 full 8-ounce jars, and my 4th is just over half full. So this is what we'll eat first. And these other jars, since they're sealed, I could technically, you know, keep them on our pantry shelf in the basement for whenever we need them. But I personally just like to keep mine in the freezer. But you don't have to, as long as you sterilized your jars, and as long as they seal, you should be able to keep them on the pantry shelf or in your cupboard shelf or wherever. So again, I got approximately 28 ounces of jam from 4 cups of crushed strawberries, 3 cups of sugar, and those 4 cups of crushed strawberries came from about 3.5 pounds of fresh strawberries. So in the past, I've used anywhere from 3 to 4 pounds of strawberries to get what I need for my recipe. So I hope that helps as you are starting on your jam journey. It's worth it. The other thing I wanted to mention is the time frame, because we all need to know how much time to budget for these different cooking projects. We all have little kids, and life is busy and crazy, and cooking takes time. So what I generally do is I like to cut up my fruit in advance. And for me, depending on the amount of distractions, I can usually cut up the amount of fruit I need for this recipe and crush it in 30 to 45 minutes. Obviously, if you have really young children, that time frame can be different. You might want to do it at a time when somebody else can watch your kids, or at night when they're sleeping. Hopefully they're sleeping. I also measure out my sugar in advance, and then I just, cover the bowls with
saran wrap or press and seal or something, and I refrigerate the crushed strawberries, and then just, keep the covered bowl of sugar out until I'm ready to use it. So from the time I started the cooking process tonight until the jars were full and I had started to wash the dishes, it was about an hour and a half. So I started at 10:30 p.m. and I finished right around midnight. So I hope that helps to give you an idea of the time frame that this whole process took. And of course, you can do everything at the same time, just I find it's easier to find spots during the day. Now, the other thing I just wanted to briefly talk about is if you do have a toddler and they really want to be involved in everything you do, or a young child, a preschooler, somebody you don't really feel confident around sharp knives, they can actually help you in the strawberry cutting and crushing process. We found this set of plastic knives at the grocery store. They're supposed to be for cutting like soft cheeses or something, but I found out that they work out really great for soft fruits like strawberries or apricots or things, and the kids can actually cut their own fruit with them, and I don't have to be nervous that somebody's gonna wound themselves. The other thing is, if you remember those egg slicers, where you put the little egg in the thing and you lift up the lever and you bring it down and it cuts the egg into slices, they actually have those for strawberries, and there's no metal in the ones that I've seen. They're actually just plastic and they're strawberry shaped, and you can actually have your child use one of those to cut up strawberries for you, which I would imagine would be super fun. So those are just some ideas of ways that you can involve your kids in this process and hopefully get it done a little bit more quickly. And of course, with older kids, you can get them involved and talk about the chemistry behind jam making, because there is a chemical reaction that occurs. And you can also have them practice their measuring skills by measuring the strawberries for you and measuring the sugar.